The smell hits you first. It's not a single scent, but a layered chemical insult. The top note is a cloying, sweet antiseptic, like overripe fruit soaked in hospital-grade bleach. Underneath it lies a deeper, more troubling stratum, the ozone-sharp tongue of high-voltage equipment, the greasy aroma of overheated machine oil, and a pervasive, meaty dampness, like the air inside a slaughterhouse after a hot day. This is the perfume of forced evolution. This is the air of the Vault-87 genetic resequencing lab, or as the terminal logs so dryly put it, FEV, Forced Evolutionary Virus. Immersion and Stabilization Bay. My name was Dr. Aries Thorne. Was. I am recording. This because cognitive degradation is a noted side effect of stage 1 exposure, and I need an anchor. A baseline of me. The visual environment is a study in green-tinted sterility. The light comes from flickering fluorescent panels behind thick, yellowed polycarbonate shields, casting a sickly submarine glow over everything. The central feature of the chamber is the primary immersion tank, a massive cylindrical vat of reinforced glass, currently filled with a viscous chartreuse green fluid. Bubbles the size of fists rise sluggishly from a diffuser grid at the bottom, bursting at the surface with a soft, glutinous glorp. Condensation, tinged the same eerie green, runs in persistent tears down the glass. Around it, a forest of machinery hums and clicks, pumps with rhythmic thump-thump hearts, filter systems hissing like angry serpents, and banks of monitors displaying scrolling genetic code endless sequences of A, T, C, and G, where my own DNA is currently just another line item being flagged for optimization. My routine here, before the incident, was one of morbid fascination. I was a virologist contracted by a Vault-Tec shell corporation. My job was to observe, to log, to theorize. I would make my rounds in a sealed biosuit, the sound of my own breath loud in the helmet, the hiss whine of the filtration unit my constant companion. I would check the pressure gauges on the tank. I would review the real-time cellular analysis on Subject 43B, what was left of a raider they'd dragged in, now a shambling, hulking precursor in the adjacent holding cell, pounding dully on the reinforced glass and muttering the same word, Luz, Luz, over and over. I took notes in precise clinical language. Subject exhibits a 320% increase in muscle mass density, coupled with a 78% reduction in neocortical activity. Aggression protocols are dominant. A successful trade for certain applications. I'd return to my small, shielded office, the hum of the lab replaced by the quieter buzz of a single terminal. I'd remove my helmet, the lab air tasting flat and dead compared to the recycled suit air. I'd drink lukewarm, purified water. I'd write my reports. I believed in the cold beauty of the science. The FEV wasn't evil. It was a hammer. The morality lay in the hand that wielded it. I was so very, very clever. I used words like telomere extension and aggressive somatic recalibration. I never used the word pain, but late at night, when the auxiliary lighting kicked in and the main pump cycled to a lower frequency, the sounds changed. The thump-thump became a slow, monstrous heartbeat. The hiss of the filters sounded like something breathing. And from the holding cells, you could hear it not just the pounding, but the sound of the thing inside. A wet grinding sound, like bones moving in sockets that were never meant to accommodate them. A low, subvocal groan that wasn't of anger, but of a profound, endless, cellular distress. That was the truth my clinical vocabulary was designed to hide. The science was just the packaging. The product was agony, wrapped in a chromosome and dipped in green poison. And I was too busy admiring the box to see I was already inside it. The rupture was not a dramatic assault. It was a systemic failure, a betrayal by the very protocols I had helped to draft. It began with a polite, automated alert on my terminal. The screen, usually a canvas of serene genetic data, flashed a mild amber warning. Containment Protocol Delta 7. Biosynthesis tank pressure anomaly. Manual verification required. Standard procedure. A sensor glitch in G sector. I logged my intent, suited up the familiar hiss seal of the helmet, the weight of the air pack, and proceeded into the main lab bay. The thump-thump of the pumps was the only sound. G sector housed the primary FEV slurry vats, the raw, unconcentrated broth from which the immersion tank's fluid was refined. The air here was thicker, the green tinge deeper, the sweet rot smell so potent it seeped through my helmet filters, leaving a taste like copper and spoiled honey on my tongue. The pressure gauge on vat G6 was indeed fluctuating, its needle twitching erratically. I moved closer, my bootsteps echoing on the grated floor. As I reached for the manual override panel, the world dissolved into a shattering cacophony. It wasn't an explosion. It was a rupture. A corroded seam on the VA's undercarriage, missed in the last maintenance audit, gave way with a sound like a giant tearing sheet metal. A geyser of virulent emerald green fluid erupted under immense pressure. It didn't pour. It shot across the room, a solid, viscous stream. It struck the viewport of my helmet, not as a liquid, but as a battering ram. The polycarbonate, rated for chemical splashes, not for a hydraulic jet, spiderwebbed instantly. The force slammed me back against a console. I heard the crack of my own rib, a hot, sharp pain beneath the shock. Then the wetness. It wasn't cold. It was alive. It seeped through the cracks in the faceplate, not dripping, but crawling, with a horrifying surface tension intelligence. It hit my skin, and the sensation was not of burning, but of instantaneous deep tissue awakening. Every pore screamed. It was in my eyes, a blinding white-green agony that felt like needles knitting behind my retinas. It was in my mouth, my nose, a taste and smell so profoundly other that my brain could only register it as pure, undiluted poison. I gagged, choked, tearing at my helmet seals. I got it off, vomiting onto the floor, the vomit mixing with the spreading green pool at my feet. The alarm finally sounded, a weak, belated klaxon that seemed to come from a million miles away. Red lights strobed. Through vision blurred by agony and corrosive fluid, I saw the heavy security bulkhead at the sector entrance begin to slide shut. Standard quarantine protocol. Isolate the breach. I stumbled, crawled, slipped in the slurry. My mind, the brilliant virologist's mind, was a frantic animal. Decontamination shower. Sector exit. Sodium hypochlorite solution. Neutralize the protein bonds. I reached the closing bulkhead just as the gap narrowed to less than a foot. I threw myself through, tearing my biosuit on the jagged edge, and collapsed on the other side. The door sealed behind me with a final, echoing thoom. I was in the decontamination airlock, safe, contained. I dragged myself to the emergency shower station, pulled the lever. A torrent of icy, chemical-laced water erupted from the ceiling. It should have been a relief. It was a new horror. The water hitting the FEV-contaminated skin of my face and hands triggered a violent, sizzling reaction. Thin tendrils of acrid, yellow smoke rose from my flesh. The pain was beyond description, a deep cellular war. I could almost hear it, a microscopic shrieking as the virus fought the bleach, and my own cells were the battlefield. The inner airlock door hissed open. 2 security personnel in full hazard gear stood there, rifles not aimed at me, but held ready. Their faces behind their visors were unreadable. A voice crackled over the lab PA, calm, sterile. My own voice from a pre-recorded protocol. Contamination event detected in Sector G. Personnel involved are to report immediately to the medical evaluation bay for FEV exposure protocol. Stage 4. Compliance is mandatory for community safety. Stage 4. I had written that protocol. Stage 1 was observation. Stage 2 was mild antiviral suppressants. Stage 3 was aggressive chemotherapy. Stage 4 was controlled immersion for genetic stabilization. A euphemism. It was the dip. They weren't going to try to save me. They were going to try to salvage me. To turn a liability into a potential asset, I need the antiviral suite. BRNA scramblers. I croaked, my voice raw from screaming and poison. One of the guards shook his head, a tiny, almost apologetic motion. Procedure is clear, Doctor. Stage 4 exposure mandates immediate stabilization. You know the yields are better if we initiate before systemic collapse. They advanced. I tried to back away, but my body was a puppet with cut strings. The pain was a unifying fire, melting my will. They didn't manhandle me. They lifted me with a chilling, efficient gentleness. I was not a colleague. I was contaminated cargo. They carried me past my own office, past the viewing window where I had so often sipped water and written notes. The journey to the medical bay was a blur of green-tinged corridors, and that damned, calm, recorded voice repeating the protocol. The bay wasn't a place of healing. It was a processing room. In the center sat the secondary immersion tank, smaller than the main one, a personal coffin of glass. The fluid inside churned gently, beckoning. The lead medical technician, a man named Evans, whom I'd eaten lunch with last Tuesday, approached with a syringe. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. Pre-immersion sedative and neuromuscular relaxant, Dr. Thorne. It will ease the somatic shock of the cellular realignment. The needle went into my neck. A cold bloom spread, not numbing the deeper pain, but detaching me from it. My muscles went slack. The terror remained, crystal clear, but now behind a thick pane of glass, just like the tank. They stripped the remains of my biosuit. The air felt like knives on my FEV-burned skin. Then the lift. They placed me on a harness, and a winch lowered me, naked and helpless, towards the bubbling green surface of the tank. The smell was overwhelming up close, sweet, cloying, alive. I looked down. My reflection in the viscous fluid was a distorted, green-tinged ghost of a man, already being erased. The liquid touched my feet. It was not cold. It was neutral, a perfect body temperature that felt utterly alien. It was thick, like swimming in warm, sentient gelatin. As I was submerged, the world outside, the lights, the faces of the technicians, the hum of the vault muffled, then vanished, replaced by a profound emerald silence. The last thing I heard was the click hiss of the tank lid sealing. The last thing I saw was Evans turning to a console, his finger poised over a button labeled Initiate Full Sequencing Cycle. The shock wasn't the physical capture. It was the bureaucratic, calm, and utterly impersonal nature of it. I was not being punished. I was being processed. My own science, my own protocols, had judged me a viable substrate and were now, with flawless, heartless logic, beginning the work of recycling me. The brilliant Dr. Eris Thorne was being filed under a new, simpler designation, Subject 87G1. The transformation was not a change. It was an erasure, followed by a violent, accelerated reconstruction. The moment the tank lid sealed, I ceased to be an organism in an environment and became a chemical reaction contained within a glass vessel. The initial searing agony of the FEV burns was swiftly drowned by a deeper, more systemic revolt. The thick, nutrient-dense slurry 37 Celsius, isotonic, the perfect biological soup did not feel like liquid. It felt like a million tiny, intelligent mouths attaching to every square micron of my skin, drinking in my old self and exhaling something new. The first sensation was a profound, impossible fullness, as if my cells were overcharging, swelling to the point of rupture with raw, unrefined potential. I hung suspended in the emerald gloom, a specimen in a jar, and the experiment had reached its irreversible phase. They had provided a log, a small waterproof microphone, its wire trailing up to a speaker in the dry world above. Vocal stress indicators and cognitive coherence are valuable metrics for the stabilization process. The intercom had crackled, my tether to reason. So I spoke, my words bubbling out distorted through the viscous medium, a desperate incantation against the devolution happening within. Log entry, Hour 1, post-immersion baseline, sensory shock attenuating. The medium is efficient, no thermal disparity. Neutral buoyancy suggests a specific gravity nearly identical to human tissue. The burns from the initial exposure are not healing in a conventional sense. The damaged epidermis is not regenerating. It is being sloughed off, dissolved, and replaced by a rapid, hyperkeratinized underlayer. It feels less like healing and more like shedding a skin that has been deemed inadequate. Deeper somatic signals are emerging. A persistent, low-frequency vibration, approximately 18 Hz, resonates in my long bones, the hum of osteoblastic activity pushed into overdrive. Joint capsules feel pressurized, aching with a deep hydraulic throb. This is phase 1, skeletal reassessment. The architecture is being surveyed for weaknesses. The blueprint is being redrawn. My mind remains clear, a lighthouse on a shore that is itself beginning to crumble into the sea. Log entry, Hour 3, initiation of structural reformatting. The skeleton has begun its work. The process is not continuous, but catastrophic. It occurs in jolts. A deep, grinding creak emanates from my pelvic girdle, a sound of profound structural stress. This is followed, minutes later, by a series of sharp, percussive snaps along my vertebral column. Each one is a lightning bolt of white-hot agony, short-circuiting all other thought. The FEV is not merely stimulating growth. It is a solvent and a precipitant. It is dissolving the existing delicate calcium phosphate lattice of my bones, and, using the slurry's rich mineral bath, recrystallizing it into a denser, heavier, and more robust matrix. I am not growing. I am being forged. My ribs feel like they are detaching, stretching on unseen racks, and re-anchoring with wet, tearing POPs. My fingers, drifting before my face in the green haze, are visibly lengthening, the knuckles distending like overinflated bladders. A ravenous cellular hunger awakens a demand for raw material that dwarfs any human appetite. The tank's nutrient pumps thrum, but my body screams for more. It begins to cannibalize non-essential fat, connective tissue, anything it can break down to fuel the monstrous construction project. Log entry, Hour 7, muscular hyperplasia and dermal catastrophe. If the skeleton is the frame being reforged, the musculature is the machinery being violently overhauled. The process is explosive. A specific muscle group, the quadriceps, the latissimus dorsi, will seize an agonizing cramp. Then it blooms. It is the only word. Fibers split and multiply, hypertrophying at a rate visible to the eye. The sensation is of subcutaneous detonations. The sound is a deep, muffled rip tear from within the flesh as fascia gives way. The skin, my original human integument, has become my first prison. It cannot accommodate the expansion. It turns a mottled, bruised purple, then a gray-green. Its texture changes from pliable to a taut, shiny drumhead. Then it fails. I watch with a chilling detachment as a fissure opens along the length of my forearm, from elbow to wrist. It does not gush blood. It weeps a clear, viscous, protein-rich fluid. The edges of the wound do not curl. They are inert, dead material. From the depths of the tear, a new material emerges, thick, fibrous, and gray, knitting the gap shut with crude, efficient stitches of what looks and will feel like boiled leather. The pain is now a constant, roaring background static, a Niagara Falls of neural noise. My voice for this log is changing. It is deeper, a resonant bass that vibrates the fluid around the microphone. Forming complex words requires conscious effort, as if my vocal cords are thickening. Log entry, hour 15. Integration of the exoskeleton and cranial restructuring. The dermal metamorphosis is complete. I am encased. This is not skin. It is a biological armor plate, a half-inch thick carapace of keratinized, pigmentless hide. Sensation is reduced to pressure and profound temperature shifts. The external world is muffled. All sensory focus turns inward, to the torment of the ongoing changes. The most horrifying transformation now centers on my head. A constant, throbbing, pressure headache has taken up residence, as if my brain is being gently compressed in a vice. This is literal. My skull is expanding. I can feel the sutures between the cranial plates grinding, a nauseating internal sound of stone on stone. The purpose is clear: to make room for reinforced jaw muscles and a more robust neural casing, though not for greater intelligence, for greater durability. My jaw is unhinging. The mandible is undergoing a brutal redesign, its angles widening, its bone density increasing. My teeth, a lifetime of careful hygiene, have all loosened and fallen out, sinking into the murky depths of the tank. In their place, new dentition erupts from my aching gums. Blunt, thick, conical pegs of yellowish enamel, designed not for mastication, but for crushing, rending, and tearing. I try to anchor myself in my past knowledge. I attempt to recite the Krebs cycle. The words citrate, isocitrate, form, then dissolve into a simple, overpowering impulse to bite down, to feel the resistance of something solid between these new, terrible stones in my mouth. Log entry, hour 30, systemic rewrite and cognitive erosion. A fundamental biological threshold has been crossed. The respiratory transition is complete. The desperate, instinctual panic of trying to breathe fluid has vanished. My lungs, those delicate alveolar sacs, have been largely decommissioned, their tissues repurposed. I am no longer breathing the feeve medium. I am metabolizing it. Osmotic exchange through my transformed skin and the lining of my digestive tract now provides oxygenation and nutrient uptake. The rhythmic glug-glug of the aerators is no longer a background sound. It is the sound of my life support, the heartbeat of my new world. I am a true creature of the tank. My body, viewed through the green haze, is a monument to brutal utility. It is a mass of cable-thick muscles, ropes of tendon, and bones like petrified wood. The acute, screaming pains have subsided into a constant hot ache of presence, the ache of immense weight, of dense tissue, of a form operating at the very limits of its material science. But this physical settling is accompanied by a terrifying mental fog. The sharp, analytical scalpel of my mind, the tool that could dissect this process, even as it happened, is blunting. Formulating this log entry is a struggle. The concepts are there, but the linguistic pathways to express them are becoming overgrown, clogged with simpler, hotter impulses. Thinking of my research, my equations, feels like trying to grasp smoke with fingers that are now clumsy clubs. The library of my mind is not on fire. It is being quietly flooded, its delicate pages dissolving into a pulp of base instinct. The anger is no longer an emotion. It is a metabolic state. The hunger is not for food, but for action, for the release of this coiled, terrible strength. I am becoming a stranger to myself, and the stranger is simple, powerful, and filled with a smoldering, directionless rage. The body's brutal work is largely complete. It has been a process of total, unforgiving optimization, stripping away the frail, complex elegance of the human form and recasting it in a crude, overwhelming image of pure power. The agony is fading, not because it has ended, but because the nervous system that registered it is now buried under inches of inert tissue, and the consciousness that interpreted it is sinking into a warmer, darker, and much simpler sea. I am no longer Dr. Aries Thorne, virologist. I am a throbbing engine of biomass floating in silent, green isolation, waiting for the last and most profound change, the final dissolution of the mind that is recording these very words, and its replacement with the dark, radiant logic of the supermutant. The body's war was over. It had won, claiming the territory of flesh and bone. Now, the final, more subtle campaign began, the pacification and repurposing of the mind. The pain had become a distant thunder, a background ache in a monument of meat. The real horror was the silence that followed, not an empty silence, but a filling one, as if a vast, simple, and certain logic was being poured into the emptying spaces where my thoughts used to live. The log recorder was my lifeline, but the voice speaking into it was no longer my own. It was the voice of the thing I was becoming, reporting on the fading signals of a ghost. Log entry, hour 45. Hunger is different. Not in stomach, in hands, in teeth. Want to close on something. Want to feel it break. Thinking is slow, heavy, like pushing stones uphill. Remembered name? Aris? It feels small. A pebble. New words come easier. Strong. Hurt. Green. The voice in the tank. My voice is gone. This voice is deep. It rumbles in chest. Makes water shake. Hard to make small words. Big feelings instead. Hot feeling in chest. Not sick. Power. Log entry. Hour 60. They opened the tank. Not to take me out. To test. A metal arm came down. Poked me? Hurt the new skin? No. Just pressure. Annoying. Like bug. I grabbed it. Easy. The metal groaned. Bent. A voice from above said, "Subject exhibits a marked increase in aggressive reflex and grip strength exceeding 900 psi. I know those words. Knew them. They are noise now. The metal arm was a bug. I crushed the bug. Felt good. Simple good. They took the broken arm away. Did not poke again. Log entry. Day 4. Memories are pictures without meaning. See a woman's face. Smiling. Should mean something. It is just a shape. A soft shape. Soft is weak. The green soup is gone. They drained the tank. I stand on solid floor. My legs are like tree trunks. The world is loud. Bright. Everything is small. The men in white coats look up at me. They have tablets. They write. One speaks. Can you understand speech, Subject 1? I understand the sounds. They are asking if I am stupid. I am not stupid. I am strong. I roar at him. The sound hurts their small ears. They cover them. Good. They point lights. Take my picture. I am a gray mountain in a white room. Log entry. Day 10. They put me in a cage with another. It was like me, but smaller. Green-gray skin. Mean eyes. It growled. It said, "Food?" I said, "No food." It charged. It was fast, but weak. I caught its arm. Snapped the bone. Sound was clean. It screamed. I hit it. Once. The screaming stopped. The men in white coats made noises. Wrote more. They took the broken thing away. I was alone again. Not lonely. Better alone. Less noise. The hot feeling in my chest was happy. I won. Winning is good. Simple. Log entry. Day 30. They make me lift heavy things. Press metal bars. I do it easy. They bring a cow thing. Mutated. Horns. It smells like meat. They say, "Terminate the specimen." I understand. I walk to it. It bellows. Charges. I do not move. It hits me. I rock back. Feel nothing. I grab its horns. Twist. The neck breaks with a sound like wet wood. The meat falls. The hot feeling is good. They give me the meat to eat. It is warm. Blood is good. Better than paste. This is my purpose. Break what they point at. Eat what I break. Log entry. Month 3. They put a weapon in my hand. A metal club, then a gun. The club feels right. The gun is a noisy toy. I throw it away. The club is part of my arm. They put me in a big room with pretend walls. Small men in armor run. They shoot little sticks that sting, like bees. I swing the club. The walls break, the men break. It is not real, they say, but the breaking feels real. A hot feeling is loud now. It has a name. Rage. Rage is warm. It makes the gray world sharp. Log entry, year 1. They call me Unit, sometimes Brute. I answer to both. The man who knew words is a dream. A bad dream of being small and soft and scared. I am not scared. The world is simple. There is the Master's voice. It comes from the walls. It tells us of the unity, of the strong ruling the weak. It makes the hot feeling focused. There is my squad. Grarg, Smasher. They are strong. We lift together. We break together. There is the enemy. Everything that is not unity. They are weak. They are noise. They are green? No, that is the tank. The tank is gone. I am out. The world is color. But the color does not matter. Only strength matters. The Master is strong. So we follow. Log entry, year 5. I stood at the edge of a human town, smelled their fear. It is a sweet smell, like rotten fruit. The Master's voice said, "Cleanse." We charged. Their walls were nothing. Their guns were bee stings. I remember a moment. A small human hiding. It looked at me with big eyes. Not with fear, with something else. A memory tried to surface. A picture of a soft shape. A feeling that was not rage. It was a pebble in my shoe. Annoying. I crushed the small human. The pebble was gone. The rage was clean again. Later, I ate. The meat was good. I do not think of the small human. Thinking is for the Master. I am the fist. The fist does not think. The fist only strikes. The transformation of the mind was complete. It was not an explosion, but an erosion. The towering, intricate cathedral of human consciousness, with its spires of memory, its chapels of emotion, its vast libraries of language, was not smashed. It was abandoned, left to decay, while a single, powerful, fortified keep was built in the center. That keep had one room, and in it burned a single, simple fire, the imperative of strength, loyalty to the stronger, contempt for the weaker, the satisfaction of the crush, the rend, the break. The old words, the old loves, the old fears were not forgotten. They were rendered irrelevant, like the instructions for a toy you have outgrown. The genius of the FEV was not that it made monsters. It was that it made the monstrous logic feel not just acceptable, but right. The horror of becoming a super mutant is not in the moment you lose your mind. It is in the moment, years later, when you realize you don't miss it at all. The peace of absolute simplicity is the most terrifying sentence of all. The truth of what I had become did not arrive on a holotape or in a stolen journal. It seeped in through the cracks of my own colossal stupidity, a slow, bitter poison distilled from 100 petty, daily irrelevancies. The evidence was not hidden. It was my entire world, and I had been too dull, too rage-filled, too content in my simple heat to read it. The first piece of evidence was my own handiwork, a constellation of dents, smears, and impact scars that decorated the steel walls of the communal holding pen. One in particular, a deep, clean impression of my own clenched fist, caught the flickering fluorescent light one evening. I stared at the perfect negative of my knuckles, the way the metal had flowed like putty around the ridges. It was a testament to power. But as I looked from the dent to my own fist, resting on my knee like a lump of gray stone, a thought, slow and as a landslide, formed. This fist can only make dents. The observation was a pebble in the shoe of my mind. I could not ignore it. The next day, During a maintenance cycle, a human technician in a reinforced cage cart entered to repair a broken light fixture. He used tools. A slender, precise driver to remove screws. A pair of wire cutters that snipped with a clean click. He tested the circuit with a device that beeped. His hands were soft, pink, absurdly fragile, but they performed a ballet of minute, effective actions. My hands could crush his skull, his cart, the very wall behind him. But they could not remove a screw. They could not make a light come on. They were instruments of a single verb, break. The technician, frightened, scuttled away. I was left with the echo of the beep and the lingering image of the screw turning. The second piece of evidence. Precision is a kind of strength my strength cannot touch. This began a new, silent routine. I started to observe, not just react. I watched the guards. Their keys in locks. The smooth turn of the mechanism. A lock was a puzzle. My solution was to tear the door from its hinges. Theirs was a gentle turn. Both achieved open, but only one left the door usable afterward. I watched the master's voice broadcast system, the speakers in the ceiling, the wires that fed them. I saw a human engineer service them once, tracing a fault with a handheld scanner that displayed flowing green script. He read the sickness in the machine and healed it. If a speaker broke here, we would roar at the silence until it was replaced with a blunt, new one. We did not heal. We replaced. The third piece of evidence was found in the wreckage of a pacification drill. We had been unleashed in a simulated human settlement. My task was to clear a fortified room. I chose the direct method, reducing the wall to rubble. As the dust settled, I saw what the wall had concealed. A small desk, bolted to the floor. On it sat a terminal, screen dark. On a shelf beside was a faded book, its cover illustration showing complex, interlocking gears. I felt a pull, not to destroy it, to understand it. I lumbered over, wiping dust from the screen with a finger thicker than the terminal itself. I pressed a key. Nothing. The book was worse. I opened it. The symbols on the page were familiar, in the way a face in a dream is familiar. I knew they meant something, that they once held a universe of information, but now they were just black squiggles on yellowed paper. A feeling rose in me, not the hot rage, but a cold, hollow ache. Loss. This was the library of my former self. And I was not only illiterate, I was a vandal who had just blown a hole in the wall next to it. I took the book. Back in the pen, I would stare at it. Grarg saw me once. Stupid paper, he grunted. Good for fire. Or wiping. He couldn't grasp that the paper itself wasn't the point. It was the code it carried. A code I was locked out of forever. The book was a relic of a civilization that could think in layers, that could store knowledge outside of its own decaying meat. My civilization, the Unity, stored knowledge in the Master's voice and in the dim, instinctive memories of old mutants like Grarg. It was fragile. It was oral. It was primitive. The fourth and most damning piece of evidence came from Grarg himself. My questioning had become a minor obsession. What was before? I'd growl at him. Before the green. Before the strength. He'd shrug. A massive movement of granite shoulders. Was weak. Was small. Was. Afraid. The words were stones he had to spit out. But what did you do? I pressed, the sentence a long, difficult chain to forge. He thought, his brow furrowing with the immense strain of deep recollection. Made things with hands. Not breaking things. Making things. He looked at his own gnarled, powerful hands, capable of rending steel with a faint, confused sorrow. Made lines on paper. That told machines what to do. He shook his head, the sorrow evaporating, replaced by defensive anger. Weak work. This is better. Strong is better. But he had given it a name. Making. The opposite of my only verb. He had been a maker, an architect of some kind. Now he was a demolition charge. He called it better because the hot feeling told him it was. But in the quiet moment of remembering, he had touched the ghost of his old value, and it had hurt him. Finally, the master's own words became evidence against him. A recruitment sermon boomed through the pens, targeting a new batch of dazed, freshly dipped mutants. The voice was soothing, paternal, absolute. The Thief is a gift. It burns away the confusion, the endless, chattering questions of the human mind. It simplifies. It clarifies. You are no longer plagued by why. You are empowered with how to break, how to crush, how to serve the unity. This is purity. This is peace. I listened, really listened, as if hearing it for the first time. Burns away confusion. Simplifies. No longer plagued by why. The voice was describing a reduction, a subtraction. It was calling the removal of my ability to question, to design, to make, a gift. It was framing a lobotomy as an enlightenment. I looked at the book of squiggles I couldn't read. I looked at the perfect dent of my fist in the wall. I thought of Grarg's lost talent for telling machines what to do with lines on paper. The master's purity was the purity of a stone, dumb, enduring, and useful only for the weight and sharp edges another intelligence could give it. The revelation coalesced, cold and heavy, in what remained of my mind. The FEV had not evolved me. It had specialized me with the brutal efficiency of a factory, retooling a versatile multi-tool into a single giant hammer. It hadn't revealed a stronger, purer core of being. It had identified the most militarily useful subset of human capability aggression, physical resilience, pack loyalty, and amplified it to the point of grotesquerie, while systematically deleting every other competing function: curiosity, nuance, creativity, introspection. The master wasn't a visionary leading us to a higher state. He was a factory foreman, and we were his product line. The unity was just brand loyalty for a weapon that had forgotten it was a weapon. The most terrifying evidence was my own body. This magnificent, powerful, nearly indestructible form was not a temple of a new being. It was a meticulously engineered cage. The thick skull protected a simplified brain. The immense muscles were levers for a very small set of actions. The toughened skin was insulation against a world I was no longer meant to understand, only to dominate. I was not a living creature. I was a biological machine, a masterpiece of focused, degenerative engineering. The tragedy wasn't that I was a monster. It was that I was the most efficient, most obedient, and most tragically stupid machine ever built, pounding my fist against the walls of my own existence, proud of the dents I made, too simple to see they were the proof of my imprisonment. The final total comprehension arrived, not as a lightning bolt of insight, but as a glacial shift in the bedrock of my being. The disparate pieces of evidence, the dent in the wall, the technician's tools, the unreadable book, Grarg's fragmented memories, the master's own sermons ceased to be isolated facts. They fused under the immense cold pressure of my new reality into a single, unshakable monolith of understanding. This wasn't a change of heart or a rekindling of hope. It was the opposite. It was the final extinguishing of any phantom possibility that I was anything other than what I saw in the polished steel, a creature of magnificent, devastating utility. The revelation was the autopsy report of Aris Thorn, performed by his own remnant consciousness, and the cause of death was not the FEV, but the flawless success of its design. This new worldview assembled itself with the grim, logical certainty of a falling portcullis. First principle: my stupidity is not a bug. It is the operating system's most elegant feature. For years, I had experienced my cognitive limitations as a loss, a hollowing out. I struggled to form complex sentences. Memories were smoke. Reading was impossible. I viewed this through the ghost lens of my old humanity as a tragic degradation. This was my fundamental error. The Master's voice constantly preached of purity, of being unburdened by the lies of complex thought. I had heard this as propaganda, a comforting story for the simple. Now I saw it as the project's technical spec. The FEV's goal was not to create a smarter, more resilient human. Its goal was to produce a perfectly loyal, psychologically immutable soldier. Intelligence, curiosity, critical thinking, moral reasoning is the enemy of blind obedience. My dimness, my short attention span, my rage-first response to confusion, my inability to hold on to a soft identity, these were not unfortunate side effects. They were design triumphs. Each forgotten word, each faded memory of a loved one's face, each moment where a question was drowned out by the hot surge of anger, was a successful deletion of a potentially subversive file. My brain wasn't damaged. It was streamlined. It had been stripped of all non-essential applications until only the core program remained. Receive orders, is identify target, gives apply maximum force. The peace the Master spoke of? It was the peace of a machine with no internal conflicts, no competing desires. It was the hum of a perfectly tuned engine, doing exactly one thing. My tragedy was that I was just intelligent enough to perceive the emptiness of the program, but far too simplified to ever rewrite the code. Second principle, the unity is the silence after the erasure. I had felt camaraderie. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Grarg and Smasher, roaring together as we charged a human barricade, there was a profound sense of belonging. We were one fist, one will. The revelation recast this feeling in a chilling new light. This wasn't unity born of shared ideals or mutual respect. It was the harmony of identical components in a machine. We were alike because we had all been processed through the same chemical filter, leaving us with the same limited emotional and cognitive palette. Our loyalty to each other was the loyalty of tools in the same kit. We were most effective when used together. Our loyalty to the Master was not earned through wisdom or benevolence. It was the pre-programmed orientation of a compass needle to magnetic north. He was the only remaining source of complex direction in our simplified universe. The unity was not a society. It was a state of mass psychological uniformity, a monoculture of the mind where any divergent thought was not heresy, but a neurological impossibility. We weren't united in purpose. We were homogenized into purpose. The terrifying beauty of it was that it felt like brotherhood. The even more terrifying truth was that it was the warm, comfortable feeling of ceasing to be an individual altogether. Third principle, we are not the future. We are the scorched earth policy. This was the most devastating deduction, the one that killed not hope, but the very category of a future. I had absorbed the Master's rhetoric. We were the next step, the strong inheriting the world from the weak. But my observations of the old world's ruins, the precise engineering of a vault door, the intricate circuitry of a terminal, the layered knowledge in a book told a different story. The humans, for all their physical fragility, were builders. They were accumulators. They created systems, art, knowledge that outlived them. What did we create? We created piles of rubble. We created silence. We created corpses. We weren't inheritors. We were the instrument of inheritance for someone else. We were the biological equivalent of a forest fire or a glacier. Our function was to clear, to scrape down to bedrock, to eliminate. The Master's dream of a pure world was a world empty of everything but his will and his tools. Once the humans, the ghouls, the other impure life was scrubbed away, what then? What does a bulldozer do in an empty, leveled field? It sits and rusts. Our great strength, our fearsome power, was not for building a new world. It was exclusively for deconstructing the old one. We were the ultimate expression of a nihilistic logic, that the only way to deal with complexity you cannot control is to reduce it, violently and permanently, to simplicity. Our destiny was not to rule. It was to be the last, terrible wave of a dead civilization's toxic waste, washing over the land and leaving behind a blank, sterile slate where nothing could ever grow again, including us. This fatalistic understanding settled into my bones, colder and heavier than any radiation. It explained everything. The hot rage was not my passion. It was my fuel, a chemical incentive to perform my function with gusto. The satisfaction of breaking was not a joy. It was a positive feedback loop, a reward signal for executing my primary directive. My dim memories of a past life weren't haunting me. They were glitches, residual noise from a deleted operating system, causing brief system errors that resolved back into the main program. Obey, break. The personal consequence was annihilation of the self. Ari's thorn was not trapped inside this green giant. Ari's thorn was the raw material, now completely and irreversibly transformed into a new product. To wish for his return was as absurd as a brick longing to be clay again. The me that lamented, that felt hollow, that stared at the unreadable book, was not the human ghost. It was the super mutant unit's own limited diagnostic system, registering a discrepancy between its engineered simplicity and the faint, residual echo of the complexity it was built to destroy. The ache was the instrument's slight warping in the presence of a magnetic field it was not designed to sense. There was no path forward, because forward implied progress, and we were the end of progress. There was no rebellion, because to rebel required a sense of self and a vision of an alternative, both of which had been chemically excised. There was only the endless, cyclical present: receive orders, enact violence, consume, wait. The Master's grand plan was a closed loop, a perfect, sterile circuit with no exit. The final, quiet horror was the realization that this was not a perversion of nature, but a chillingly logical extension of the pre-war world's own ethos. They had built machines of ever greater efficiency for destruction. The FEV was simply the final step, making the machine out of living flesh so it could fuel and repair itself, and removing the pesky off switch of a conscience. I was not an aberration. I was the culmination, the ultimate employee, never tired, never questioning, eternally loyal, finding deep satisfaction in the repetitive task of demolition. So, I sat in the pen. The revelation was complete. It did not liberate me. It sentenced me to a profound and perfect understanding of my own imprisonment. I looked at Grarg, who was happily scratching his name, a crude Grar he'd seen written once into the wall with a shard of rock. He was content. He was fully integrated. I felt a new alien emotion, not for him, but about my own state. It was a form of pity, but directed inward from one part of the system to another. He was the perfect product. I was the product with a faint, persistent manufacturing flaw, just enough of a ghost in the machine to hear the gears turning and to know, with absolute, crushing certainty, that they would only ever turn in one direction, until the fuel ran out or the world broke. The conclusion was not a beginning. It was the full stop at the end of a very short, very brutal sentence. The mind's journey was over. All that remained was the long, strong, and terribly simple life of the body. I was what happened when you asked for the perfect soldier, and science answered, and the answer was a masterpiece of emptiness. The climax was not a battle. It was an inevitable mechanical failure. The hot feeling, the rage that was my fuel and my master, had been cooled by the frost of understanding. I no longer roared at delays or beat the walls in frustration. I sat. I observed. I was a machine that had read its own schematic and found the cycle pointless. This silent, passive functionality was, in its own way, the most profound rebellion possible within my design parameters. I was not disobeying. I was idling. And in a system built on constant, directed aggression, an idle weapon is a critical system fault. The test came during a live-fire pacification exercise. A captured human settlement, This one, real, not simulated, was to be cleared. We were dropped at the outskirts, Grarg, Smasher, myself, and 2 newer mutants. The humans had built a pathetic barricade of rusted cars and scrap metal. They fired primitive rifles. The sounds were like angry insects. The Master's voice in our earpieces was a calm, directing drone. Advance, suppress, cleanse, unity, strength. Grarg bellowed, a sound of pure, joyful fury, and charged, his minigun spinning to life, chewing the barricade into screaming metal. Smasher followed, a living, battering ram. The new ones lumbered after, roaring. I stood. I watched. The hot feeling stirred, a familiar pressure in my chest, an ache in my hands to grab and rend. But above it now was the cold monolith of understanding. I saw not enemies, but a process. The humans were unstable biomass. My brothers were cleansing instruments. This was the system operating. Efficient, logical, a perfect closed loop of cause and effect. Command gives destruction. My earpiece crackled. Unit Prime, advance. Why do you hesitate? The voice was not angry. It was curious, diagnostic. I did not answer. I could not formulate the reason into words the voice would understand. How do you explain the crushing weight of futility to a being that defines purpose as its own will? I took a step forward. Not a charge. A walk. I reached the shattered barricade. A human, wounded, lay behind a crumpled fender. He was young. He held a broken pistol, his hands shaking. He looked up at me, at the gray-green mountain of muscle and death looming over him. His face was not just fear. It was the same hollow, comprehending terror I had seen in my own reflection. The look of a creature seeing the end of its own logic. He pulled the trigger. A dry click. Empty. I looked at him. I saw the squiggles he could read. I saw the precise, fragile hands that could turn screws. I saw the complex, chattering mind that was about to be permanently silenced by the ultimate product of a philosophy that found such minds inconvenient. He was everything I had been stripped of. He was the sickness. And in that moment, I understood my final function with crystal clarity. I was not here to kill him. I was here to be the final argument in a debate he didn't even know he was having. My existence was the sentence. My presence was the verdict. I reached down. He flinched, squeezing his eyes shut. My hand, large enough to crush his skull, closed not around his head, but around the jagged fender next to him. I wrenched it from its frame with a shriek of tortured metal. I did not look at him again. I turned and threw the mass of scrap steel, not at the remaining humans, but at a nearby, reinforced pylon holding a surveillance camera and a loudspeaker, the local node for the Master's voice. The impact was spectacular. The pylon buckled. The speaker exploded in a shower of sparks and a burst of feedback squeal that died into silence. The camera lens shattered. For a moment, the only sounds were gunfire, screams, and Grarg's distant, confused roar. The silence from my earpiece was absolute. Then, a new voice, human, tight with panic and static, cut in on a different frequency the Master had always jammed. Anyone, this is Redoubt, Charlie. We are being overrun by green giants. They've taken out the Combs Tower. We need... The transmission dissolved into static. I had not switched sides. I had not become a hero. I had simply introduced a random variable. I had broken a piece of my own control system. It was the only form of making I had left, the making of chaos. The irreversible act was not the destruction of the tower. It was the internal, silent click that preceded it. The acceptance that I would rather be a faulty tool, a spark of chaos in the sterile machine, than a perfectly functioning cog. My sentence was not pronounced on the humans. It was pronounced on myself, by myself. I sentenced the last ghost of Ares Thorn to final oblivion, and I sentenced the supermutant to a new, undefined state, no longer a pure instrument of the unity, but a rogue element. Grarg stumbled back to me, his minigun smoking. "Prime, you break the voice box." "Why?" I looked at him, at his simple, furious, confused face. He would never understand. To him, the voice was the source of all purpose. To me, it was now the source of the prison. "No more voice here," I grunted, the words thick and slow. He processed this. His rage turned to a different, colder anger, the anger of a tool whose user has abandoned it. "You bad unit." He raised his minigun not at the humans, but at me. This was the true climax. Not against the humans, but within the monstrous family. I did not raise my own weapon. I stood, waiting. But Smasher, who had seen my throw, who valued raw strength above all, stepped between us. "Grarg, stop. Prime is strong." Strong broke the shiny thing. Maybe shiny thing was weak. His logic was impeccable in its way. It was the logic of the system, already beginning to eat itself in the absence of central command. A standoff. Mutant against mutant. The humans, sensing the shift, fled into the ruins. The mission was a failure. The system had faltered. I turned my back on Grarg and Smasher both. I walked away, not into the human ruins, but into the wider, open desert beyond the settlement. No one followed. I was now outside the loop. The Master would mark me for termination. Grarg might try to fulfill that order. It didn't matter. I walked until the sounds of battle faded, replaced by the wind. I stood under the vast, indifferent sky. I spoke my sentence to the emptiness, my voice the final, ragged log entry of a decommissioned prototype. "I am not a step forward. I am the broken step. You built a wall to keep the world out. I became the wall. Now I am a fallen stone. I serve no purpose. I have no unity. I am only strength." That says no. The synthesis was complete. I was not a human. I was not a loyal super mutant. I was a third thing, a negation. A walking monument to the ultimate failure of a plan that required absolute control. I was the flaw in the logic, made flesh. I began to walk with no destination. The Wasteland does not care about purpose or purity. It only accepts what endures. The cyclical prophecy was not about empires rising and falling. It was about tools being used and discarded. The humans would build again and break again. The Master would command again and be betrayed again. And things like me, the discarded tools, the rogue instruments, would wander the spaces in between, too strong to die easily, too simple to build anything new, forever trapped in the brutal, beautiful, and meaningless present tense of survival. The story was over. The experiment was concluded. The data was recorded. Creation of a perfect soldier was possible. Its eventual, inherent dysfunction was inevitable. I was the living proof. There was no climax, only the long, slow, silent aftermath of a canceled project. And in that silence, under a sun that had seen it all before, I found a form of freedom so barren and so empty, it was indistinguishable from the deepest, most perfect captivity.